Welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is titled Demystifying FDA's Pre-Market Final Guidance. My name is Etienne Nichols. I'm a medical device guru here at Greenlight Guru. I will be the moderator for today's event. Today's webinar is supposed to run for about 60 minutes in total, and we definitely want to hear from you. On the right side of your screen, you'll see a few tabs. Looks like most people have already seen the chat tab, but the chat tab is where you can engage with other attendees. You can post general comments. The Q&A tab, though, is where you can ask specific questions. That's where we will draw those questions to ask our presenters to answer at the end during the Q&A portion of today's webinar. So feel free to use the chat, but use the Q&A as well for the specific questions. One other thing I'll add about the Q&A is you do have the ability to upvote questions. So even if you don't have a specific question you'd like to ask, feel free to head over to the Q&A and look at those and upvote those questions that might be relevant to you and your organization. One question we always get is, will you share the full recording and slides with all registrants after the webinar? Yes, we will be doing that. So keep an eye out for an email from us later today. I'd like to share a few words about Greenlight Guru and our co-host Vigilant Ops and why we put on these free training sessions. Improving the quality of life for our customers and their patients is our mission here at Greenlight Guru, likely a similar mission as many of you joining us today. We're constantly looking for ways to fulfill that mission, whether that's through hosting these free webinars, partnering with world-class medical experts like today's co-host and presenter, or through our award-winning cloud-based solutions. At Greenlight Guru, our focus is on moving MedTech forward. Our solutions are designed to help streamline your processes so you can navigate the regulatory hurdles and succeed in the market. Our MedTech suite provides quality management, product development, and clinical data management solutions designed exclusively for medical devices. So if you're interested in seeing why 1,100 of the world's leading MedTech companies trust Greenlight Guru, head over to www.greenlight.guru after today's presentation for a personalized demo. Also, our partner Vigilant Ops is aligned with that mission of improving the quality of life. Their award-winning platform automates and simplifies compliance with the latest SBOM cybersecurity related regulatory requirements, very relevant to today's topic. And they help medical device manufacturers focus on developing groundbreaking, life-changing technologies. They are truly simplifying the SBOM journey for the industry. Now, let me give you a proper introduction to your presenter today. Jessica Wilkerson is a senior cyber policy advisor and the medical device cybersecurity team lead with the All Hazard Readiness, Response, and Cybersecurity, the ARC team in the Center for Devices and Radiological Health within the FDA. As part of ARC, she examines issues and develops policy related to medical device cybersecurity. We're really excited to have her. I mentioned the mission of Greenlight Guru. The mission of the FDA is to make sure that we have safe and effective devices. So we are very much appreciative for them and for the work that she is doing. I'll also introduce Ken Zalewski. He is a certified cybersecurity leader with over 19 years of experience in the medical device industry. He serves as a trusted cybersecurity consultant to national and international healthcare industry stakeholders, including the FDA and the Department of Homeland Security. During his tenure at Bayer, Ken led medical device cybersecurity and is currently serving as founder and CEO of Vigilant Ops. And with that, I'll let you take it away, Jessica and Ken.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone so much for having me. If I remember the order of events correctly, I am just diving into my presentation. So now everybody gets to watch as I attempt, we'll see if I succeed, to get my slides pulled up successfully.
We believe in you.
I appreciate the faith. I think it worked, but
yes,
I have now lost access to my screen, and hopefully you're seeing
Looks great.
The right version. So we will just dive right in. Well, thank you everyone so much. I really do appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to everybody about FDA's final pre-market guidance. For those of you who have been following this guidance's journey, it was about 6 years in the making. And so the fact that we finally got it across the finish line is something that FDA is very much proud of and very much thrilled about, because we do think that it really is part of the maturation of medical device cybersecurity and will really help the sector continue to drive medical device cybersecurity forward. So without further ado, we're going to dive in. But we're going to start at a slightly different place than I think some folks may have expected me to start, which is instead of diving right into the guidance or even anything on our new law, we're going to start with the why. Because as much as we like the guidance, as proud as we are of it, we didn't do it just because we thought it'd be a good idea. We didn't do it just because we really, really love paperwork or navigating bureaucracies in terms of getting this thing through clearance. We did it because it needed to be done. And this is why, right? We've seen over the years continuous cybersecurity vulnerabilities that have affected the healthcare sector and medical devices specifically, where cyber threats can have and do pose patient safety risks to the healthcare sector. So this is not in any sense hypothetical, right? I think there is a temptation sometimes, and we've actually heard this in conversations that we've had with stakeholders, in conversations that we've heard people having with other stakeholders, saying essentially like, who would ever want to do that? No one wants to hack medical devices. Well, one, we've seen with the spate of ransomware incidents that healthcare is certainly a target. But even then, there's this other idea of sometimes the targeting of healthcare is accidental. Healthcare can be collateral damage. A medical device can be collateral damage. And to the point of vigilant ops and the things that they're doing with software bill of materials, third-party software in medical devices sometimes means you're inheriting cyber risks that you didn't really intend to. And sometimes the cyber threats that are now part of the medical device or the medical device must be able to be resilient against is in the supply chain. And so things that can affect the broader supply chain in different sectors also affects healthcare and medical devices. So that is why we spent 6 years and 102,000, that's not an exaggeration, comments on the last version of our draft guidance, because it really does matter, because we really are seeing these things affect medical devices and the cybersecurity of those medical devices in ways that can have and have had patient safety risks. So now that I have gone over that, we're going to actually dive into the new law. So for those of you who don't know, in December 29th of 2022, so not this last December, but the December before, there was something in the United States that was passed called the Consolidated Appropriations Act. You will hear me refer to it as the Omnibus. And that omnibus contained something called the Food and Drug Omnibus Reform Act, or FDORA. And within that section, it was a big section. There was a lot in it related to FDA. There was something called Section 3305, titled Ensuring Cybersecurity of Medical Devices. Pretty self-explanatory what it covered. But what it did specifically is it added a new section, 524B, of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, this Ensuring Cybersecurity of Devices section, that added explicit cybersecurity statutory requirements for certain types of medical devices. So for those of you who are familiar with FDA processes, this is a little bit of a review, but for those of you who are not familiar with FDA processes, in the United States, for most medical devices, or for quite a few of medical devices, especially those that contain things like software and others, medical device manufacturers aren't allowed to sell those devices until they come to the FDA and get what's known as marketing approval. And to get that marketing approval, they have to submit something called a pre-market submission, which FDA then reviews and looks at to see whether or not medical device manufacturers have provided, and this is the bar, a reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness. So based on the evidence in the documentation, essentially has the medical device manufacturer proven to FDA that the medical device is safe, that it is effective, and then it will remain so throughout its what we call the total product life cycle, throughout the lifetime of the device. Now, in the past, we looked at that. We looked at cybersecurity under that general safety and effectiveness bar, because to us, cybersecurity is patient safety. If you do not have a cybersecure device, then you do not have a safe device. But over time, and our experience essentially showed, we needed a little bit more teeth. We needed a little bit more to our ability to review for cybersecurity. And so we worked with Congress, and that's what this authority came from, is adding a new requirement into the law itself. So not FDA regulations, but into the law itself that says for certain types of medical devices, now medical device manufacturers must provide a reasonable assurance that the device is cyber secure. And so we'll go into that in the next couple of slides. But the big change, right, is now the requirement to be cyber secure for many types of medical devices is statutory. It's not an FDA regulation. It's in the statute. So it applies to prospective submissions, which means it's only for things going forward. It's not for devices approved before this passage. For things like 510Ks, de novos, HDEs, PDPs, and PMA pathways. And this law was effective 90 days after signing, which was March 29th, 2023. So it has been in effect. These requirements have been in place for devices coming into the agency for almost a year now. So let's actually get into what the law says. I'm sorry, you're probably seeing my cat. I'm just going to leave him because otherwise it's going to be a continuous fight. But what you see on screen is the definition of a cyber device. So a cyber device has to have these three things. This is not an or, this is an and. To be a cyber device, every one of these criteria has to be met. The medical device includes software validated, installed, or authorized by the sponsor as a device or in a device, has the ability to connect to the internet, and contains any such technological characteristics validated, installed, or authorized by the sponsor that could be vulnerable to cybersecurity threats. So if all three of these are met for a medical device manufacturer's device, that device is considered a cyber device, and they must meet the requirements that we're going to talk about on the next slide. A couple things that I want to point out on this slide. You'll notice 2 is probably one of the most important provisions in this definition. It says, has the ability to connect to the internet. That wording, you should pay very, very close attention to what that wording says. It says it has the ability to connect. It does not say it does connect. It does not say it is intended to connect. It says it has the ability to connect. So if you're a medical device manufacturer and you are thinking through whether or not your medical device may qualify as a cyber device, think about that very, very carefully and pay attention to what it says. But let's go into what the requirements are. So Section 524B requires certain things for those cyber devices when they come in for pre-market submission. The first thing, which is what we call 524B-B1, is a requirement that medical device manufacturers submit a plan to monitor, identify, and address in a reasonable time post-market cybersecurity vulnerabilities and exploits, including coordinated vulnerability disclosure and related procedures. So when you actually take this out of fancy statutory speak, what this says is you got to have a plan for managing cybersecurity risks and vulnerabilities, and you must have a coordinated vulnerability disclosure program. So if you are a cyber device manufacturer, by law, you now have to have a coordinated vulnerability disclosure program if you did not have one before, which you really should have under previous existing regulations anyway. 524BV2 is also extremely critical because 524BV2 is the design requirements. That requires that cyber devices and medical device manufacturers design, develop, and maintain processes and procedures to provide a reasonable assurance that the device and related systems are cyber secure. And if you look at the remainder of B2, what it requires is updates. So by law, cyber devices now must be updatable. They must be updatable. They have to be able to be updatable on what is termed a reasonably justified regular cycle. So you have to have a regular patching program. But for unacceptable risks, uncontrolled risks, you have to be able to do that out of band. You have to do that out of cycle. That's not our wording. That's in the statute that you have to be able to do that. One other thing that I will note on this as well, pay attention to the wording. Reasonable assurance that the device and related systems are cyber secure. So it's not just a requirement that the device is cyber secure. The related systems like update infrastructure, cloud backends, peripherals, tablets, anything that the device relies on to actually carry out its intended function may be a related system. And by law, that related system must now be cyber secure as well. And then 524BB3 is SBOM. SBOMs have to come in as part of pre-market submissions now for cyber devices. And then the last one, which is very exciting for the FDA, potentially maybe less exciting for people who are under FDA jurisdiction, but 524BB4 says we get to make additional regulations to ensure a cybersecurity of medical devices if we see the need. So it's essentially an open door where if we think we need additional stuff, we can go out and do that additional stuff. So to start getting into the pre-market guidance itself, a couple of high-level points. It was published on September 26, 2023. It technically was, issued on September 27th, but that's just Federal Register shenanigans for anyone who is a Federal Register nerd. Recommendations are intended to help manufacturers comply with requirements under Section 524B of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, but the scope is much, much broader. It addresses how cybersecurity fits into the quality system regulations. So those Part 820 CFRs this guidance talks specifically about those and how pre-market submission and documentation requirements tie into the QSR. We held a public webinar on November 2nd, 2023. That recording is available online. And for those of you who are actually submitting submissions, eStar will include a guided walkthrough of the guidance and 524B to inform and support electronic submissions. So a couple of the key updates from the 2022 draft. Expanded scope. We talked about CBER submission types. We talked about considerations for combination products. And we added elements associated with the requirements under 524B. We also made some structural changes based on comments that we had received. So we added new sections in the security risk management section to clarify certain documentation deliverables, including cybersecurity risk assessments and interoperability. And we added Appendix 4 to further clarify documentation recommendations. So if you're thinking through what documentation do I need to submit as part of my submission, Appendix 4 is probably going to be an extremely useful part of the guidance for you. We also made some updates to the SBOM section because we got quite a bit of feedback on it. We clarified, I want to make this point very clear, we clarified that we were already, but we're even more so, aligned with the 2021 NTA SBOM framing document. So we essentially pointed to that industry work and said, if your SBOMs are in keeping with what the NTA recommended, you're good to go. We also made sure that folks understood that supporting materials can be separate from the SBOM. So we received a lot of feedback and concern that some of the additional information we were asking for related to software, like supportability, end-of-life dates, and associated known vulnerabilities, that putting that information into the SBOM could affect its machine readability. We get it. We said that's fine. You can give us that stuff separately. The key is you still have to give it to us. So the final cybersecurity guidance, the final pre-market cybersecurity guidance, lives really in harmony and as part of a cycle with the post-market cybersecurity guidance. So pre-market cybersecurity guidance, how do you prove to the FDA that you have built a cybersecure device and related systems? And post-market cybersecurity guidance, once you've gotten approval, how do you maintain the cybersecurity of the device over its life cycle? And we take lessons learned from post-market incidents, vulnerabilities, and so on, and we feed that back into the pre-market cybersecurity guidance. So these things become a cycle in terms of what we see, what we expect in the updates that we make. Here's another thing to consider. The pre-market cybersecurity guidance is the big guidance, if no other sense than the number of pages. But it's not the only guidance that you should be paying attention to if you are trying to get a medical device through review at the FDA. Things like the multiple functions guidance, the off-the-shelf software guidance, the software guidance itself. All of these things are other things that you should be looking at. A couple of other considerations to think through. In a cybersecurity review, this is the way that FDA views these. So to the extent that you think that you should understand and align with how the FDA looks at cybersecurity reviews, here's your slide. Software engineering is about ensuring that certain things happen. Security is about ensuring that they don't. And to maybe bottom line this a little bit more, the question that we are concerned about is what can the device do or be made to do versus what was it designed to do? Because I don't think any medical device manufacturers are sitting down to design a device that can be manipulated through cyber means or that is exposed to cyber threats. But it's possible that you did design a device that did that. And so that's what we're looking at, is what can the device do or be made to do versus what it was designed to do. Here's another big thing to keep in mind, especially considering the law and the enactment date of March 29th and the fact that we now have devices that were approved before the law, devices that were approved after the law. Past performance does not guarantee future security. So if you had a medical device that was cream of the crop, totally secure, state-of-the-art, cyber secure several years ago, doesn't mean that the device is secure today. And it doesn't mean that the FDA is going to buy that the device is secure today. So you need to prove and you need to demonstrate why, any of the updates that you've made, the changes that you have done in the device to show that it is secure today, as opposed to secure in the environment that existed whenever it was originally cleared. And again, we went over this a little bit in the why slides, but don't ask who is ever going to do that. The question is just irrelevant. If it can be done, it needs to assume that it will be done, and it needs to be mitigated against. So in terms of looking at whether or not cybersecurity applies, here's some considerations, right? So cybersecurity applies if the device is or contains software. Cybersecurity documentation is certainly required if the device meets the definition of a cyber device. But more broadly, cybersecurity considerations apply regardless of whether the software or software component was designed by the medical device manufacturer or a third party. So it may be that the cyber threat or the cyber risk is coming from a third-party software component. From our view, that is still the medical device manufacturer's responsibility to mitigate the potential risks in the device. So whatever that means, working with a third party, patching it, putting in place compensating controls, whatever that may be, it's not going to be good enough from the FDA perspective for a medical device manufacturer to say, well, we don't have control over that component, so we're just waiting to manage the cybersecurity risk until that third party does something. Not good enough. A couple of other things to consider. Cybersecurity risks will increase if a device contains one or more of these kinds of interfaces. From a wired perspective, USB, Ethernet, SD, CD, RGA, etc. From a wireless perspective, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, RF, inductive cloud, etc. Those kinds of things. And again, and especially thinking about the scope of the law, cybersecurity considerations apply for the entire system, not just for the end device. So software update infrastructure, cloud applications, commercial devices, etc. All of these things must demonstrate cybersecurity as well. And if it's a cyber device, then those may count as related systems. And by statute, by law, those cybersecurity considerations must be in place. So we'll spend a little bit of time actually going through some of the specific guidance considerations. These are the big 5 sections within the guidance: security risk management, security architecture, cybersecurity testing, labeling, and cybersecurity management plans. I'm going to go through each of these one by one. Some of them will have a little bit more detail than others. So in security risk management, this is a really chunky section because it is so key to what we're talking about in and of itself, right? We are talking about security risk management. So this section has a lot of the meat of what is in the guidance. So a couple things to consider. It applies to the context of the larger system in which the device operates, and it should be integrated across the total product lifecycle. So we expect So these slides accidentally got auto advanced through, and we keep forgetting to fix it. So apologies, you're going to see me have to fix it. But in any case, this is an end-to-end assessment of the cybersecurity risks and controls. So it's not just a point in time. It's not just part of the system. It's the entirety of the system. For those of you who are familiar with or work on safety risk management as well, security risk management is a parallel but interfacing process with things like ISO 14997. So I would recommend actually reviewing that part of the guidance if you have questions on what we mean when we say that. And manufacturers should provide their security risk management report in pre-market submissions. And we recommend seeing AAMI TR 57 for more details. So to actually go into security risk management a little bit more, a couple of sections in here that this section gets broken down into: threat modeling, cybersecurity risk assessment, interoperability, third-party software components, unresolved anomalies, and TPLC security risk management, or metrics. So threat modeling has a full section. Recommend reviewing that. Also recommend looking at the threat modeling playbook, which is cross-referenced within the guidance. Cybersecurity risk assessments have a really good section within them for breaking down and understanding what the different pieces of a cybersecurity risk assessment are. The interoperability was one of those new sections that we added in response to different comments, where we had received quite a few comments from the diabetes community concerned that cybersecurity was going to be used as an excuse to essentially deny them access to their data or to their devices. And so we made it clear in this interoperability section that we added that cybersecurity should enable interoperability. It should not be a blocker. So for those for whom interoperability is a consideration, I would look at that section and keep that in mind. Third-party software components, I have another slide on, so we're going to skip that for a second. But unresolved anomalies, you need to do a security risk assessment of your unresolved anomalies. I think that's pretty straightforward, but check out that section of the guidance if you have more questions. And then metrics. Like, look, cybersecurity is not a point-in-time assessment. You can't say, my device was cyber secure at the time of its clearance, I'm done. So metrics, including things like, how long does it take for something to get patched? How long do vulnerabilities exist in the system? These help us and you understand the security risk management program at your company, what the risks might be just to patients, depending on what some of those metrics show. So those are very important as well. So looking at things like third-party software components, we know SBOM is a big one. The other thing that I'll point out on this section too, just to make sure that folks understand, SBOM is not the entirety of third-party software risk management, right? SBOM is part of third-party software risk management. It's not the only thing. So just everybody bearing that in mind. As I said before, the recommendations in our guidance align with the NTIA's framing document. We do recommend a machine-readable version be submitted to the FDA. And we do, as I said before, acknowledge that supporting documentation, such as component support information, is this thing supported? What was the end of life date, or what is the end of life date? And then different vulnerability assessments. Those can be included separately from the SBOM, but again, they do still have to be included. So moving back, pulling out of security risk assessment or risk management and looking at the next section, security architecture. So I'll be honest, this sounds a little bit flip, but I promise it is genuinely meant. Security architecture is a fancy way of saying, draw us a picture. Cybersecurity systems are extremely complicated. Systems are only getting more and more complicated. It's sometimes very difficult to understand how the different pieces and parts fit together. So it helps you, and it certainly helps us, if we can look at the views and pinpoint visually how the system is broken down, how the system works, how the different communication flows go, etc. So that's that architecture views section, and those different views that we recommend are meant for exactly that, letting us essentially deconstruct the system and look at it from different categories to see whether or not we think that it demonstrates that reasonable assurance that the device and related systems are cyber secure. So if you're looking for more detail on the views themselves, like how to put a view together, Appendix 2 contains recommendations for the level of detail for the views. One other part, just to bump back up to the top of the slide on security architecture, a big part of this section is looking at implementation of security controls. So the bottom line is, and this shouldn't surprise anybody, security needs to be designed in. And we recognize 8 different security control categories, and then provide Appendix 1, which contains recommendations for each category of security control, specific recommendations, specific discussions of pitfalls. Sometimes we've talked about things that we've seen that don't work. So Appendix 1, as Matt Hazlett, for those of you who know Matt, he heads up the Cybersecurity Focal Point program, is very much one of the most important people when it comes to cybersecurity reviews in the FDA. He says, Appendix 1 is one of the most important parts of the document to be looked at. You will be reviewed against Appendix 1. So don't ignore it. Cybersecurity testing. So the cybersecurity testing section talks about a couple of different things. One, it talks about types of testing. So security requirement testing, threat mitigation, vulnerability testing. Pen testing is a big one. Penetration testing is a big section in this. And one of the things that the cybersecurity testing section does is start making recommendations on things like the independence and the technical expertise of those penetration testers or of other testers. Because there is a concern, and we have seen this and we have given feedback to manufacturers before, that if the penetration testers don't have a significant level or a sufficient enough level of independence from the product teams, then we're not sure, we can't be sure that the testing was actually done properly, that it had the proper scope, that they were given the proper freedom to actually test the system in a way that was meaningful. So be aware that FDA is actually looking at the independence of penetration testers and may actually provide feedback to manufacturers that the independence was not sufficient. And that's obviously not something that you want to get late in the game. So if you have questions on that, we recommend the pre-sub process, the Q-sub process, et cetera. But also read this section of the guidance and really think through as you're doing penetration testing or preparing for it, whether and what the independence of the testing teams may be. We also talk about scope of testing. So this is another one that manufacturers have gotten feedback on. If you limit the scope of the testing down to something that essentially means you didn't test the whole system and it wasn't a system level test, it didn't look at the related systems, FDA might not think that that's sufficient enough to actually qualify as sufficient testing. So just be aware that the scope of testing is something that FDA is looking very carefully at. This section also contains recommendations on third-party testing if you're going to use a third party, and it also makes a recommendation on the submission documentation to be included. So I'm sorry, not finally, we've got one more after this. Labeling. So labeling is also a pretty chunky section. It's got 14 different recommended elements. And we recognize that it can be provided in different locations depending on appropriate users for the information. So when I say that, what I specifically mean is the labeling information, especially about cybersecurity, that needs to be provided to a clinical engineer in a hospital is going to be significantly different than the cybersecurity labeling information that is going to need to be provided to a patient. And so we say in there very specifically that the cybersecurity information needs to be appropriate for the end users. And if there's multiple different end users, you probably need to have labeling targeted for each of them. We also talk in the labeling section about different mitigations and risk transfer items and looking at things and recognizing that those labeling mitigations and risk transfer items may need to be included as part of human factors testing. Because at the end of the day, if your cybersecurity is extremely effective, but it's not usable or comprehensible by an actual human who's trying to use the system, is your system really secure? Have you actually really succeeded? So these are things that the labeling section discusses. The bottom line is that the labeling focuses on ensuring that users have sufficient information on the device to integrate it into, for example, a larger hospital system and to manage security risks and updates. So finally, and this is actually finally, the cybersecurity management plan. So this section includes discussion of managing cybersecurity throughout the lifecycle, including vulnerabilities and incidents. It recognizes that plans should include coordinated vulnerability disclosure processes, as described in the 2016 guidance. And again, if you are a cyber device manufacturer, coordinated vulnerability disclosure is now required for you by law. And then the cybersecurity management plan also includes items like periodic security testing to test identified vulnerability impact, timelines to develop and release patches as outlined in the 524B-B2 sections, and then the patching capability. What is the rate at which updates can be delivered to devices? How effective are they, and so on. So the cybersecurity management standard is another one that has a lot of things built into it. And that is actually it. So I think I'm going to bump out of sharing my slides so that I can see the screen and everybody again. But welcome questions or anything else. Thanks all.
Fantastic. I know you covered a lot of ground really quickly there, Jessica. So thank you so much for going through all of that. We got a lot of questions. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the top. Well, first, I'm going to remind the audience, if you have a question, use the Q&A. I won't always be able to keep identified if it's in the chat. I'll try, but definitely check out the Q&A. Even if you don't have a question, go to the Q&A and upvote the questions that are most relevant to you. So let's go ahead and go through some of the ones that are most upvoted. So the first one was, From Megan Martin, can you speak about expectations around platforms like AWS, some Amazon Web Services platform? What is expected in the product documentation and risk management for functions inside that platform scope?
Sure. So cloud documentation and essentially cloud integration within medical devices and related systems, I think, is a very complex but growing area for medical devices for good reason. Manufacturers are looking to integrate cloud services into, or they already have integrated them into their devices and related systems. Expectation wise, essentially, the biggest thing that we see and that we run into is do not assume that the cloud manufacturer, the cloud provider is taking care of all the things related to security, right? That essentially that, okay, I've put this part of my medical device functionality on the cloud and the cloud provider is responsible for it and they take care of everything. No. You need to, as the medical device manufacturer, have worked out with the cloud provider what the division of responsibility is in terms of security and other functionality. That is documentation that we would like to see in terms of the pre-market submission so that we can understand that you've worked out those roles and responsibilities appropriately beforehand. Things like testing, cloud, things like security architecture views, these all need to include the cloud considerations. We understand that there are certain things that manufacturers don't control about cloud environments, but what you do control needs to be very, very clearly documented. What you don't control needs to be very clearly documented, and we need an explanation from you as to how you are still actively a participant in maintaining the security, the safety, the effectiveness of those environments. If that means that you are just regularly meeting with the cloud provider, if you have an agreement with the cloud provider, whatever it is. But essentially, the biggest mistake we've seen and continue to see is that people assume that the cloud service provider is responsible for everything and they can just write that off and forget about it. That's not true.
Okay, very cool. And that there are so many questions, just FYI, for those of you who are asking questions, if we don't get to them all, we'll go ahead and provide those on to our presenters. And if they're able to get to those, we can maybe follow up with all of them individually. Another question is from Kevin, and maybe this one's from Kevin Johnson. If a medical device only connects to a mobile app on a phone through Bluetooth, are both the device and the mobile app regulated under cybersecurity? And maybe if we, Jessica, if we go a little bit further, there's lots and lots of questions about, I'm going to give you one more just so we can be a little bit more broad. There's one more that talks about, does a hardware device that connects via Bluetooth to a mobile device that is connected to the internet qualify as a cyber device? So questions about what qualifies as a cyber device, lots of questions around that, if you want to speak to that a little bit more.
Yeah. So I think if you look at the guidance and what's currently in there, it goes back to that recognition of that question of, does cybersecurity apply? If you have a wired interface, if you have a wireless interface, of which Bluetooth is certainly one of them, the likelihood that you are a cyber device is extremely, extremely high. And I'll put it this way, right? Bluetooth is a piece of software. Bluetooth is a piece of software that can be vulnerable to cybersecurity threats. Sventooth, Bracktooth, numerous other ones that we've seen. And Bluetooth, by specification, allows connection to the internet. So I will leave it there. But if you remember the three prongs of the cyber device definition, there you go. If you have specific questions about whether or not your device is a cyber device, I recommend reaching out to the FDA, either through the Q-sub, the pre-sub process, or you can email, and I think it's in the slide, or we can get it to you, cybermed@fda.hhs.gov.
I think that's a good way to answer it. If A equals B and B equals C, does A equals C? So, okay, we'll let them figure that out. Is FDA collaborating with their EU counterparts to align the security guidelines for globally sold medical devices? There are increasingly complex requirements to comply with. This is from Andrej, if I'm saying your name correctly.
So for those of you who don't know, FDA is an active participant in the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, and we actually co-led the cybersecurity working group underneath that forum that has produced 3 different guidances within the last 3 years. One of them was on principles and practices for medical device cybersecurity. So that's the overarching guidance. one was on software bill of materials, and one was on legacy devices. So are we working with our international counterparts on aligning cybersecurity regulations? Very much so.
Very cool. All right, thank you. And Ken, I want to get some questions for you as well. So I don't know if you've gotten a chance to look over the Q&A to see if any you want to jump in on. I know there's some very little bit more technical things, but let's ask this question. Would compliance to IEC 81001 help ensure compliance to this FDA guidance? It's really either or, Ken or Jessica, whoever wants to hit the buzzer.
Sure, I can start, and then if Ken has something to add, would certainly welcome that. I think it tends to be an issue of, will a standard, especially FDA can recognize consensus standards, help in your compliance with certain FDA guidances or certain requirements? Yes. Will compliance with a certain standard satisfy the FDA guidance or requirements in totality? That's a little bit tougher, right? And I would say at this point in time, I would suspect that would be very difficult to do. So I might leave it at that, but I would say, for FDA consensus standards, especially some of those ones like, I can never remember how many zeros are in it, but the 8100 one that was just displayed, that one is certainly a standard that has been recognized by the FDA, has brought adoption across the industry. So it will certainly not hurt you in your submission with the FDA.
Yeah, that's great, Jessica. Thank you. And great presentation and good details. And I guess I would just follow up and agree with you 100% that the pre-market guidance is, the focal point and where the focus should be. But there are lots, and you pointed these out in your presentation as well, lots of other documents and guidelines that have been released in the meantime. And to your point, they can help. There are lots of good suggestions, frameworks that have been put out by various organizations that help with respect to the SPDF or the TPLC, Total Product Lifecycle. And all of those things can be leveraged to get you there. But, I 100% agree that at the end of the day, you got to be looking at the guidance itself and the recommendations there.
Okay. I want to, so I'm kind of wading through the questions that are talking about the definition of whether or not cybersecurity is applicable. So I know those are burning questions in a lot of people's minds. So I'm getting down to, let's see, this one's from Joanna Martins. She asked, for devices that are 510K exempt and do not need to do a pre-market submission, do manufacturers still need to comply with Section 524B?
So technically 524B requirements only apply to the ones that are listed in the statutes. But what I will say, if you look, and actually I'm actually really glad that this question got asked, because I think that this is an important distinction to draw. The pre-market cybersecurity guidance is not the 524B guidance. The pre-market cybersecurity guidance has a broader scope than 524B. So cyber devices, the ones that are actually in the definition of the law as in scope and must meet the requirements, those must meet the requirements. The pre-market cybersecurity guidance has a significantly broader scope that essentially says this applies if your device it falls into it. Is it software? Does it contain software? Can it be vulnerable to cybersecurity threats? And in that case, here's the other thing, right? So for 524B cyber devices, the statutory bar, in addition to safety and effectiveness, is now reasonable assurance that the device and related systems are cyber secure. The regulatory bar of safety and effectiveness hasn't gone anywhere. So all medical devices must still meet that safety and effectiveness bar. FDA still continues to view cybersecurity as part of safety. So if you have a medical device that is technically not within the scope of 524B, that does not mean that cybersecurity requirements don't apply. It means they don't apply that specific bar of reasonable assurance that the device and related systems are cyber secure. It is still relevant under the safety bar. So I would just be careful about thinking how all of this fits together, and just remember that the overall FDA regulations of safety and effectiveness, of which cybersecurity is a part, have not gone anywhere.
Okay. I want to kind of shift a little bit to the more practical side, because I want to pull out some of Ken's knowledge. Aaron, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, asked about examples of threat mitigation testing. I don't know if you want to talk about some of the best best-in-class examples of how to implement some of these things.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. So, yeah, I mean, there are lots of there are plenty of examples out there, resources you can find on threat mitigation testing. I think in Jessica's slide, she had something about software, and it's kind of, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but think about software is not really, you don't look at security of software as what it was meant to do, but what can be done with it. And so you have to think about threat mitigation from the perspective of a bad actor. And that actually is somewhat difficult in some cases for traditional manufacturers who have kind of been looking at the safety aspect of devices for so long. And security is a little different animal with respect to understanding not just what you've built into the product, which is where safety comes in, but also what folks could do with that product and may, go off label, so to speak, and use the product in different ways that maybe you didn't think of. And so thinking through threat mitigation from all those angles is really important. And I think the other piece is, and then Jessica had this in one of her slides, and kind of I think was a good point that maybe was brushed over a little bit, which is a picture's worth 1,000 words in my mind. If you look at the architectural overview of products or systems, understanding where the vulnerabilities and the threats might be, that actually conveys a ton of information to your engineering teams, to folks understanding where data inputs are and outputs are, where there may be risks throughout the product, understanding the data flow. That all comes out in the architectural diagrams and documents. And I can't say enough for having that level of detailed knowledge of devices with respect to threat mitigation. So a lot there, but there are a lot of resources to rely on with respect to that as well. So I'll turn over to Jessica as well to comment.
I don't think I need to. I think you covered it very well.
Yeah, wanted to give you a break as well, Jessica. You've been talking for a long time, so really appreciate that. Another question, this one's about additional guidances. What AMI or IEC guidances exist for developing cybersecurity management plan? Does FDA recognize some of the AMI or IEC guidance standards for cybersecurity management plans?
So I will confess that I am not the world's most conversant in standards. I'm not able to just rattle them off the top of my head. But I do know that there are several that are relevant for cybersecurity. The ones that I do know, possibly because they're very short, is AMI TR 97 and AMI TIR 57, both of which I know are highly relevant to this space. The 8101 series was mentioned from IEC. And then I would recommend, if the standard space is of interest to you, to go look at the FDA consensus standards database. That's where you're going to find the standards that FDA has recognized and what parts of the standards FDA has recognized, what they may be used for, et cetera.
And could eStar, this is maybe I'm just throwing a Hail Mary here, eStar could potentially help with some of that, I believe.
So eStar is the electronic submission platform. I don't know if
they were
eStar
linked.
would.
Yeah.
It's I'm not an eStar expert.
No, that's okay.
It's possible.
I'm on the fringe here, so. I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to add, Ken, to the standards conversation.
I think the documents that Jessica mentioned are really appropriate. The TIR documents, they provide a lot of good guidance and framework for folks to follow, and a little more prescriptive, a little more, I would say, tactical, which is good. You can get lost in those standards pretty easily with respect to kind of making the advice more practical. So I would kind of use them sparingly, as Jessica pointed out. I think there are loads of them out there, and you really. All of them talk about cybersecurity in some form or fashion, but sticking with the top, especially in the TIR space, is not a bad start, for sure.
Okay. This question comes from Robert, and I'm kind of curious about it myself a little bit. So could you give your thoughts on the concerns that public-facing SBOMs may provide assistance to attackers searching for a way to get into a device? What are your thoughts?
I'd love to give my thoughts on this. Yes. So... So FDA's perspective on this is very much in line with the NTIA's perspective on this. So I don't know if anyone has looked at the NTIA's FAQ, frequently asked questions on SBOM. This question is asked verbatim. Isn't this? I think they use the phrase, "Aren't SBOMs going to provide a map to the attacker?" No. or not any more than they already have, right? The only thing that not having SBOMs does is undermine defenders, because if an attacker wants your information, they're gonna get it. And so the only person that we would be hurting in trying to keep SBOM information non-public or trying to keep SBOM information secret are the people who are trying to protect systems from being hit with cyber threats and so on. Now, I don't want to be completely dismissive, because I understand the concerns that are here, but the bottom line is, right, your SBOM should not be dangerous to you. Your SBOM should not be embarrassing to you. If you are having to put out an SBOM that you really wish people weren't able to see and weren't able to look at, that may be an indication that you need to go back to your software supply chain and really investigate whether or not the software that you are using is software that you should be using. Is there software that you should be removing because it's simply too vulnerable, because it isn't supported? Whatever the reason, I do think we are very much aligned with NTA and others who think that now is really the time for us to take a really hard look at how we do software development and potentially reconceptualize how willing we are to just grab all kinds of software and random software and start sticking them in critical infrastructure, which medical devices at the end of the day are.
Ken, I know you've got to have some thoughts on this.
Oh my, yes. Yeah, I concur 100%. I mean, I think that the information's out there and available for components and vulnerabilities. Vulnerability information is widely available, and I agree with Jessica. We're not providing any additional information that folks probably don't already have, and I also think we're at this point, and it's a great way to say it, that cybersecurity or security of devices is paramount and should be paramount. So going back to that, and I think I saw one of the questions in there, where does cybersecurity fit in the TPLC? Well, I mean, it fits all across the TPLC. And if you take it all the way back to the beginning of the TPLC and design and development work of products when they start, right? I mean, we as manufacturers should be thinking differently from the very beginning, thinking about security as a baked in piece of the product and not as a bolt-on. So to Jessica's point, if you get to the end of the cycle and you've produced a product that's got a lot of holes in it and a lot of vulnerabilities into your using your phrase that you're embarrassed to put out there, then you really didn't do your job upstream, probably, right? So I think it's the opportunity now to kind of step back and say, how can we be better? How can we do this differently? Not necessarily kick or shoot the messenger, let's say, right? I mean, the SBOM is one tool in the arsenal, but it's not the only thing. And it provides that information that, as I said, is pretty much out there already. So what you got to think about is, now that information is transparent, and hopefully that pushes folks to think about this more upstream. So I think it's a good turning point and a good way to move things forward from a security perspective.
Okay. Let's make this the last question, because just to give you guys some breathing room here, this question comes from Ashwani. How do I know what system level testing to be done? If I have an interoperable medical device that connects to a mobile app and I am submitting only the device for 510K, what testing do I submit? Also, this medical device is on its own cannot connect to the internet, which I know is open-ended. It doesn't necessarily mean it's not cyber.
Yeah. I can take this in a few parts. I'll start with the last one, the last sentence. The medical device on its own cannot connect to the internet. Remember that the part of the requirement is medical device and related system. So if the medical device sits in a related system and that system can connect to the internet, that requirement in the definition may be met. But then again, looking back on has the ability, if the medical device has the ability to connect to something that has the ability to connect to the internet, you probably, or you may transitively be able to connect to the internet. But this is where talking to the FDA through a pre-sub or a Q-sub or something can help answer that question specifically. In terms of civil system level testing, interoperable medical device that connects to a mobile app, I will say from our perspective, we need to understand how the cybersecurity works between the medical device and the mobile app, because obviously if the mobile app is being used, we assume that that's part of the functionality of the device. And so if there's information flowing to or from the mobile app, we need to understand how is that information being protected so that, one, it can't be changed either on its way to the device or from the device. We need to understand What happens when the communication pathway is broken? Essentially, if something happens and the device is disconnected from the mobile app, does the device cease to function? We've seen that happen before. Does the device cease to be able to work or do what it's supposed to be doing? So that kind of system level testing is what we're looking at. Is we need to know for the medical device, in all likelihood, some things about the mobile app. How is the mobile app itself being protected? And then for the exchanges of information and functionality that are happening between the device and any apps or other related systems or functionality, how are those different interactions happening? We want to see the testing there for that as well.
All right. Ken, I don't know if you had any follow-up.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Again, it goes back to that architectural diagram. As Jessica was speaking, I was picturing all that in my mind that, again, putting that security architecture document together can bring a lot of this to light, a lot of these questions to light. Where's the data flowing? Where is it susceptible? Those kind of things. That's a good point.